Yesterday, the chairman and CEO of the Women's Tennis Association announced the immediate suspension of all WTA tournaments in China, including Hong Kong, over the situation of the Chinese tennis star, Peng Shuai, who earlier last month posted an alleged sexual assault against a top Chinese government official before mysteriously disappearing. In his statement, Steve Simon said, quote, "While we now know where Peng is, I have serious doubts that she is free, safe, and not subject to censorship, coercion, or intimidation," end quote. You know what? I'm glad to see women's tennis taking a stand against the abusive communist regime of China. But the question is, where's the NBA? Where's Coca-Cola? Where's Dow? Where's Procter & Gamble? Where's Airbnb? Where is the Olympic Committee? Where's the Biden administration? Joining me now to talk about this is our good friend, China expert Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. He can be found on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon G. Chang, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony.
This is a pretty big announcement by the Women's Tennis Association, is it not?
Oh, it certainly is. If we go back a couple of years, we can see the NBA's reaction to that tweet by the general manager of the Houston Rockets. The NBA was craven, but the Women's Tennis Association is really stout and resolute. And I think this shows there's a tipping point of opinion on China, because right now we have, for instance, Enes Kanter, who has changed his name to Enes Kanter Freedom, who became a U.S. citizen a couple days ago. Center for the Boston Celtics. The NBA has left him alone, despite saying some pretty nasty things, not only about Beijing, but also about the league and as well LeBron James. So this, I think, really shows that people are looking at China in a very different light.
So why is that? What's happened in the last 2 years that has brought us to this point? Is partly COVID? Is it the Trump administration that was tough with him? What is it?
It's all of the above. We didn't know when the tipping point would occur, but we knew that at some point that it would be just too much, that China's actions were too despicable, too repulsive, that just people couldn't stand it anymore. Now, as you point out, we've got a president, we've got a number of big American companies, sponsors of the Beijing Olympics that's supposed to start next February. They have yet to be moved, but we are starting to see it's not just the American people. We're starting to see a number of others believe, look, this is just wrong, and that this is morally wrong for us to have these dealings with China.
Again, women's tennis having to be the out front running point on this against communist China. You wonder, where's big bad NBA? And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, in what I read, that the Women's Tennis Association was leaving about $1 billion on the table here by walking away from it in the sponsorships and the advertisements they were getting. But their sponsors like Coca-Cola, Dow, Visa, the others that I mentioned, they haven't said a word to my knowledge about this, have they?
No, they haven't. And we also know that the International Olympic Committee has been very quiet, even though they've talked to Peng now twice in what were obviously staged conversations. Beijing is worried that the momentum is building to move the Olympics. And so it's doing everything possible to try to make sure the IOC doesn't do that. Stalin is reported to have said the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of 1 million is a statistic. Well, I think what we have seen is the plight of one woman has an emotional resonance with people. And so it's really become impossible, for instance, for the Women's Tennis Association to just continue business as usual. And that means it's going to be impossible eventually for the Men's Tennis Association to have events in China and other sporting organizations. So this will build up steam. And that's a good thing, because clearly China is morally repugnant. And we now, I believe, Tony, have a moral imperative not to do business with China.
That's a really good point, Gordon, that now this abusive regime has a face on the victim. And the rest of the world can see this. And I think that makes a huge difference, as opposed to, faceless, nameless Uyghur Muslims or Christians that are being persecuted. Now we have someone who people can identify with. And I do think it's interesting. We have seen this momentum. Are we at that tipping point where we could see the international community kind of close ranks against China?
I hope so. And maybe I'm a bit too optimistic, but I do think that this is the time for activist groups to propel this movement and to fuel it, largely because right now Beijing doesn't have an answer. We have seen some very clumsy propaganda videos and the rest. And everything that China's been doing has been making it worse for itself.
Yeah.
So right now, I think this is a time. And obviously, as we learn more and more about what's going on in China, not just with the Me Too movement, because Peng did accuse Zhang Gaoli of rape, but also just because in general,
Right.
a lot of things have just occurred.
And it's a good time to think about all this at Christmas time when people are buying things, to not buy products made in China, oftentimes with forced labor, and doing business with those companies that turn a blind eye to the abuses of the Communist Party. Gordon, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it.